The floor is yours, Todd.
All right, I thought I'd start just with a basic question. Maybe it's every writer gets this question, but especially you, Mac. Like, why did you think uh, that you wanted to turn away from writing? Like, you've been very successful at writing theoretical, philosophical, psychoanalytic books. So, what made you think like I want to write a novel? I mean, fiction is maybe the not necessarily the correct
Whatever the
word,
word. A
but
novel.
novel, yeah. So what made you turn in that direction and and abandon basically? I mean, I understand it coincided with you retiring from academia, so there was a little bit of that, like, so maybe it's like starting over or something. But what what was not available to you? In because a lot of people today, this question is lasting too long, but a lot of people today write theoretical works that are, there's this whole movement called auto theory, right? Or they at least integrate a lot of their life into the theoretical approach. So that wasn't tempting to you, I take it. So what was
I'm
the
the attorney on the other side saying, is there a question here?
yeah? So my no, my question is like, what
I
was
know
exigent?
what your question is.
What was exigent about turning to a novel?
Okay. First of all, I think I returned to something I had abandoned through a failure of courage. Uh, but I also want to contextualize that when I was in college and first read The Republic of Plato, I was fascinated when Socrates came to this point where he said, there has been from of old a quarrel between philosophy and poetry. Somehow, and that quarrel was sustained, I think. Somehow, when I read that, I said, that's the question that is going to preoccupy you, maybe for the rest of your life. I took the route initially of trying to become a theorist who would deal with that and other questions primarily through a philosophic conceptual approach. Uh, Although you'll see from the books, I'm always banging at that question in some way, and you know that, Todd. But what I always felt, uh, and this was in some ways sustained by my work as an actor while also being a teacher, I somehow felt that I'm not trying to argue for a preference of poetry or philosophy, but I felt that turning to trying to write a novel, which was the thing I thought I was going to write when I was a senior in college, that I was returning to that I was getting at experiences that I had not been able to understand, and that I might understand in a different or new way by writing this novel. And as you know, this novel is the first of a 5 novel series. There's 2,000 more pages that I've written that I have to revise. So it's a mammoth undertaking, and the undertaking is in some ways to deal. William Faulkner says that all genuine fiction is about the human heart in conflict with itself. I think that's what I did not have the courage to sustain as an exploration when I was 21 years old. So it haunted me, and I came back to it at 60, and I can tell you that there's a certain amount of blood on almost every page. So I guess what I'm saying, and I know this will be more a better response to where I know the question's coming from for you. I found that writing fiction put me in touch with places within my own consciousness that had been lost or buried or inadequately developed through the kind of writing I'd been doing.
Yeah, so I was the when you wrote this book, which I think is a really good book, Deracination, which is a book about Hiroshima basically and the sublime and Kant. I typed it. I was the one who typed that book into the,
That's
into the
right.
computer. So I am intimately familiar with that book. And as I was typing it in, I remember thinking, well, actually, you should be writing a novel about this. Like, because of it's so, and I think you feel this less today because we've had a lot of arguments about it, but that book was so anti-conceptual
Yeah,
that I thought, wow,
yeah.
I mean, why is it like, okay, it's anti-conceptual, but it's conceptualizing Hiroshima.
It's the
So
only
I thought there was something kind of paradoxical about that. So in that sense, it does make sense to me. I mean, that was in, I think, I don't know, 95 or something. So I feel like I did feel like you were going in that direction even then, or that was the logical direction to go to. I mean, one thing there's a lot of things that strike me about the book, but maybe we should get into that. But I think that uh, the the way that you engage with this is what's interesting to me. The way that you engage with thinking in the book in the novel is very unusual, I think. And I wonder if you can say more about that. And I think,
I would
in fact,
like to.
I don't know of any other, just to lay my cards on the table, I don't know of any other novel that really, I think there are a lot of novels of ideas, right? Like there's
Yeah.
Moby Dick as a novel of ideas, Magic Mountain's a novel of ideas, but no, there's no other novel I don't that comes to my mind of the novel of like reading and struggling
Yeah.
with ideas. And
I,
so
I,
what, yeah.
I think this book is about not the growth of a mind, but the creation of a mind. I think it's a book about someone who is drawn to thinking from his earliest experiences and who slowly becomes aware of how radical the act of thinking is. Uh, as you know, the novel begins in his childhood, and a lot of it changes once he finally gets to college. I was the first person in my family who ever made that move. And the incredible discovery that you can make through reading. It's also a book about what it means to read. It's trying to teach the reader how to read and basically saying if you learn to read this book, you'll be reading yourself in a certain way. You know, so many people waste the time they spend reading by reading junk or by refusing to read things in the way they demand. What happened to the protagonist, he gets to college and all of a sudden he starts reading. And as you know, first time I ever experienced silence, because I was brought up in a house of 8 people with only 2 bedrooms. And if that doesn't produce edible conflict, I don't know what will. And I got to college and there was silence, and there was Pascal with his stupid wager, and me saying, this wager, you know the Pascalian wager, that you can either bet that there is a God or there isn't. If you bet that there is a God and you're right, you get eternal life. If you bet that there isn't a God and you're wrong, you go to hell, or you get nothing. So a wise person will bet on God. They use that crap to try to make a theological argument that we must all. I went to a Jesuit Catholic college, by the way, that everybody must believe. And I thought, what an insult to the existential anguish that goes into thinking about the eternal questions that faith and philosophy involve, than to reduce it to a cheap bet, appealing. It's almost like Pascal was a pimp, appealing to all the cheapest things in us. So those were those kinds of, what was really going on there was not just me arguing with Pascal, but was me discovering myself, discovering what thinking meant to me. That was an early one. That was freshman year, and I got a B in that course because of the essay I wrote on Pascal. But so what?
That's great. I mean, I think that's a passage that really stands out. I think when you're reading it, like as just like you're saying, like evincing the struggle of someone thinking and someone coming to themselves through thought. And I think another one is when you talk about your reading of Brothers Karamazov, right? Like, I think I really like that idea, what you're saying, like it's a novel about like how to read, like how to really, so it made me, I have to say, I had a bit of a super egoic response because you're like, you have to read very slowly. I never read slowly. And then the other thing you say is like, what you just said, like, don't read crap. And you sent me an email about a week ago about, oh, do you know blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, basically I just read the murder mysteries. And if I'm reading a
Yeah.
novel, it's basically Dashiell Hammett. It's the high, it's
Well,
Dashiell
what
Hammett's
I
high
get,
ground for me.
what I get
Michael
when anybody
Connelly.
hears that I've written a novel, neighbors and people around, they say, "Oh, are you going to make a lot of money on it?" And I have to say, I have never written a single word to make a penny. And I think the commercial novel is something that should be abolished.
You think it should be abolished?
I really
Wow,
do. I think
okay,
people
okay,
waste
okay.
what could be one of the most profound experiences of their life is wasted in this idea that literature should be entertainment and it should be uplifting, it should have nice, happy closures, and it should be something that you can forget the minute you've read it, etc. Part of my effort in this thing, and especially in the college stuff, is not only to show the beginnings of thinking in Michael that freshman year, but to show how by the end of 4 years, this person has developed a mind that's like a steel vise and it's on fire, and that thinking has become such a complex process for him. And I wanted to offer that in place of the ways most people thinking is something where you latch onto some stupid commonplace and that resolves everything, and you think, yeah, well, I thought about that. It's not. I want to speak seriously to your question, because as you know, I wrote a book called Inwardness and Existence, which is a very philosophic book, and I think it and this novel are in some ways the same thing, or are mirrors of one another. That it's almost as if I am now going to try to recapture and dramatize the experiences that led to my writing that book, which I thought writing that book was what at the time I foolishly said was an absolute choice, that my existence would be weighed by my effort to write this book. The Last Catholic, which we should tell your audience, the name of the book is The Last Catholic, and the author is Walter Ray Davis, and you can get it print or electronic. I have to tell you on that, if you go to Amazon and you call me up, underneath, they frequently have other books that they're recommending that they're all religious books. They've misunderstood. Title has to be, and on some of them, they're trying to sell Catholic Bibles and rosaries too. So
I thought that if you put in your name, you'd get a bunch of things about basketball. But your namesake about basketball.
Oh yeah, the great Walter Davis, the
great Walter Davis. He died
for the Phoenix Suns.
Yeah, he died unfortunately. Yeah, he died. He's younger than you, and then. But let me talk. Can we talk about so this volume, which I want to say to people, like, I thought I've read all of Mac's everything, this whole novel. I mean, the other volumes too.
I've read all of Todd except the 2 books he wrote this past week.
Right. I wasn't trying to brag or say how much anything, but my point is just that I think what I like about this novel is that it really stands alone. And I think it's also, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's also much more autobiographical than the later sections, right? Like, I think you're pretty confined to what things that your take on them is a little different maybe, but you're confined to what actually happened to you.
It's a fascinating experience for me because, yes, this is autobiographical, but it's not a memoir.
Right.
It's because frequently what didn't happen is more real than what happened for us because of our of how we experience the world in terms of our own psyche. So there's not only are there many composite characters in this and all that kind of stuff, but there's many things that did not happen, but they did happen. They happened inside my heart. And as you know, in the subsequent volumes, they become more and more fictional and inventive, but they're really, even then, their inventions derive from many different experiences, finally synthesized in terms of some insight into them. I think the problem with most autobiographical works, and I spent last week, I read Thomas Merton's The Seven-Story Mountain and Augustine's Confessions, because I wanted to see what other autobiographical books about faith were like. Both Augustine's Confessions is one of the greatest works ever written. Merton's
is not so bad. It's not so bad.
Merton's is very good. He's a fluid writer. There's but well, let me now I'm let me say one thing about Merton's book, which I admire. But it's both Augustine and Merton are books about people who have faith or find faith or things like are always their experiences is within the dominance of faith. When Merton is in a secular world, he's hungry for something else. He says, he's Peggy Lee. Is that all there is? No, let's find something else. And he's always in, it's always that I shall not rest until I rest in thee stuff. My experience was one, and many people, when I left the religion and I announced that to my family and to I was the great atheist on campus who people would bring their how can you not believe in God? I found it was a really interesting way to meet women. But you were subverting your chances unless you let them think converting you. All right, enough of that. My story is not about somebody, and people would say, you lost your faith, as if you'd lost the thing that was more intimate to you than you yourself. And they'd always say it with a great sense of sadness and rue that this had happened. And what I learned is I did not lose my faith. I discovered that I never had it. That's I think a very different experience than most, because I think in one sense this book can be put within religious writing. But it's about somebody who, because of the crap that was imposed on you, that you were told believe this, belief could never happen in any existentially meaningful way.
Well, that I find that a very interesting part of the book, and that you have an exchange with your mom about that very thing, and you say to her just what you said to us, that you didn't lose your faith, you never had it. And I think that's one of the more powerful things that comes through the book. Like it's almost like the whole religious drama passes by kind of externally, and you never, it's like, and this is a contrast with both Augustine and Merton, I think, like it's not, you never have this moment where you're like, God heal me from sin, but not yet, right? You never have,
I love that.
There's never a moment where you're like, I don't know, is this sinful or is it not? Or do I believe or not? There's really like, and I find that fascinating. There's like none of that wrestling. And so I wonder if that's what you really wanted to get that out of there, or not have that in there.
I want to say there's another wrestling that I think is more primary in it. One of the things I found out about Merton's book, because I got a new edition and they had some background on it, Merton had a section in it that the monks and priests convinced him to take out of the book. Turns out Thomas Merton had an illegitimate child in London with a woman. There, once or twice in the book, he mentions that I was given over to wild ways and stuff like that. There's no sex in the book. And but he put that in his first edition. They persuaded him to take it out, that it would detract from, I guess, the spiritual quest. My book, as Todd knows, my book has an ironic title, for one thing. Catholic, the word Catholic means universal. And I can assure my future readers who are watching this podcast, the last universal in my book is not religion, folks. The last universal in my book is sexuality. And the entire book is about someone trying to free his sexuality from the things that have been imposed upon it. Part of the book is that it's set initially in the 40s and 50s, when the Catholic Church was dominated by a world of sin, shame, and guilt focused on the evil of sexuality. And we had it pounded into our heads day and night. And so before you could even begin to think you might discover your sexuality, you had it sullied with all sorts of stuff that created a very powerful super ego that led to sex being then experienced with great anxiety and guilt and with all sorts of struggle. Mine was complicated by the very intense Oedipal relationship I had with my mother. I was her firstborn son. She transferred all of her affection from my father to me. She called me the Crown Prince. Think of Hamlet's father if he were still around, and his mother was calling Hamlet the Crown Prince. You could, and my mother wanted me to be a priest.
But
And
Freud's mom was like that too.
When my mother wanted,
Freud's mom.
yeah.
Oh, right.
My mom was very seductive with her wants for her children, and so, so when I reached puberty, or before, because I think, and I remember a shrink one time saying to me, "You never had a latency period." And I said, "Oh, I couldn't. There was no way in my world that you could have a latency period." But my sexuality, when I first came to it, I discovered the immense power of that religion within me as something that I rejected intellectually, but that I couldn't get myself free of. And much of the book, in fact, a little tip about this book, I think one of the keys for me is that by the end of the book, this guy has freed his mind from all of it, and his mind is becoming sometimes terrifying to me how radical it is. But he has not freed his sexuality. He's still in bondage to the various confusions. And the second volume is going to be, in fact, I thought at one time, imitating Spinoza, of calling the first volume of Human Bondage and the second volume of Human Freedom. But the second volume is much more about the quest that one has to go through, the kinds of experiences one has to go through in order to liberate one's sexuality from the various, I don't know what you'd call it, the various perversions that are imposed upon it. And that to me is a very interesting thing. And it might go back to your question, Todd, because I feel very much that there's a split that develops in this guy's experience. He by the end of this thing, the church is still stronger within his psyche than his own mind. And I think maybe the change, Todd, is that I wanted to dramatize in, as it were, minute particulars, all of the ways in which you can have your mind and your body twisted into knots when you have a certain sick view of sexuality imposed on you. By the way, I've had a lot of fun recently telling people, there's a wonderful book out called The Sexuality of Jesus. And it shows that most likely Jesus had a wife. His DNA may still be circulating out here somewhere, who knows? He was, and I've always thought, if the incarnation means anything, it means that he put on the body. He was sexual. But you will notice most Christians will be horrified by that idea, because we've had built into that religion that Platonic and Neoplatonic hatred and condemnation of the flesh. So Jesus can be a man, but he can't. I had a priest one time. I was playing with him. I play with priests. That sentence doesn't mean you won't see me in the remake of Spotlight. I was talking to this one priest one time, and I said, "Did Jesus ever masturbate?" And he said, "No, he never masturbated. He got an erection, but he never masturbated." And I said, "Well, how about a
How would they know that? Like, why do they even make this stuff up?
He make it up. I said, I wanted to say to him, how, because he said it as if it was absolute knowledge. He had absolute knowledge that Jesus had erections, but he never masturbated. I guess that was that he was always overcoming temptation or stuff. So I said, how about a nocturnal emission? And the guy kind of paused and I said, oh, well, maybe the Holy Spirit intervened at that point. And that was the end of that
That's
conversation.
psychotic.
But I think part of, we see this sickness all the time, the war on women and their sexuality that's going on in the United States right now. And most of it backed by troglodytic misunderstandings of what the Bible says. And I mean, among other things, the Bible never says that abortion is murder. The one time abortion is mentioned is in Exodus, and the punishment is that if you cause a woman to lose a child, you got to pay her husband a fine. So that's, that's the Sam Alito was well in cooking back in the days of Exodus. Jesus never spoke against abortion. Abortion is not murder biblically, but they will tell you as if that is the one thing that's clear in all the Bible. And why? Because it tries to put women in the handmaid's tale. Because it's a resentment of weak men who are terrified of sex and who probably have been very unlucky in that area of life to impose their fear and project their hatred on women. And then the heresy to try to find some biblical basis for that. It's a shame there is no hell.
So I find what you just said fascinating. So I think that you're right that the novel is, there's an intellectual emancipation that it's chronicling, but then not a sexual one, right? Although, I mean, you're right that it really is about his sexuality as much as it is about his intellectual journey. I think that's absolutely true. But then it ends, and I think you said to me like, oh, it's terrible because he ends in hell, kind of. It's terrible, the ending is really a tragic one. But
he gets married.
Right, he gets married, but it's a really fascinating. The marriage is fascinating. I mean, I know that this is actually true, but so I can't even remember her fake name. What is her name in the novel?
Kim.
I can't.
Kim.
What? Kim. Yeah. I didn't want to out her.
That's all right. She's long gone from this
I know
earth.
she's gone, but your sons are alive. I don't know. It's but I think one of the things that struck me about the novel was that you really, and I think this just bespeaks how much what you're saying is true, that it's like, why does he get with her? You're like, you can't even, it doesn't even make any sense except in a way that it pleases the mother. So it's interesting that
Can I pick up on that before we move on? Because I'm a little bit flighty today, I guess. Freud said that frequently when we choose someone who is like the parent of the opposite sex or unlike the parent, and we turn them into that parent. I think the novel ends with Michael marrying that particular woman because it both sustains and doesn't threaten his tie with his mother. I think he is one of, I think of the book many times as you go from Orestes to Hamlet to Michael Coit, and you've got three different forms of the Oedipus. And I think the Oedipal drama of this book I don't think it's the church that has the rope around his dick, to use proper language. I think it's his mother. And I think that he's profoundly in love with his mother early in the book, because the mother offers him an intimacy. I mean, one of the things, when she turns from the father to him, she doesn't just say, oh, you're a nice little boy, pouring out her soul to him, telling him all her needs and hungers and wants and conflicts and everything. And if you're a young kid and your mother offers you that kind of emotional and psychological intimacy, you are bound and I think it's also clear that you are being incested. That when a parent makes a child feel that they are responsible for that parent's well-being, that is, to say the least, inappropriate, and it's always tied to some kind of Oedipalization. So that thing is so strong in him that it's what he brings to every relationship he has with women, with a couple of exceptions. There's this, and this is the other thing I want to say about sexuality, because I think the larger project of this entire series is, and I don't have a better word for it, is to restore the sacramental sublimity of the sexual, to say that it's the last Catholic. There's a section early in the book, and I gave a reading the other night at a church near here, and I talked with everybody, and they had said, well, we hear, in fact, the minister had put down on the thing that given its subject, there was a warning, there are some sexually explicit passages. So I showed up at the thing, and the people said, where are those passages? And I said, it's just like D.H. Lawrence, you can find them real fast if you need to. But then I did say, I'm not going to cheat, I'm going to read one. And there's a part where the nun banishes Michael to the cloakroom in 8th grade. And pretty soon Michael is taking out his penis, and he's walking around the cloakroom, and he's touching it to girls' scarves and stuff like that. And for the first and only time in his life, he doesn't feel any guilt. He doesn't feel any sin. He doesn't feel any shame. Now, the way I've just said it sounds bizarre, but I think the way it's written, there's a moment in there where he has discovered something miraculous about his sexuality, which will become something he I think loses and then tries to regain. So I'm not saying this very well. This is not just a book about a guy who has to go get rid of a lot of crap so he can get laid a lot. It's a book about somebody who is trying to rediscover the intimacy of touch in all of its awe-inspiring ways of opening us to ourselves. That's why one of the things that he will come to is the notion that sex should be something that takes place that covers most of a night, because a lot of the time you're talking to each other. This from a man who, Taxi Driver, he says, this is a man who wouldn't take it anymore. This is a man who would not fall asleep immediately after. I'm not saying this well, but the larger project of the book is to, somebody said, actually cheating, she stole it from Rimbaud, and it was Julia Kristeva. We must reinvent love. I think the only way we're going to reinvent love is to reinvent sex. And the only way we're going to reinvent sex is to discover the immense complexity of the human body, especially the complexity of that sense called touch. The book itself opens with a quote from Wordsworth, where he says, and I think two of the greatest lines I ever read, "A child, through intercourse of touch, I held mute dialogues with my mother's heart." That, to me, is the kind of experience that I'm trying to represent in this book. Experiences where the intimacy of touch is a communication and reveals you to yourself. It's not that all that different from a lot of the stuff that Sartre gets at in Being in Nothingness, but that's another matter. Have I lost the thread?
No, not at all. Not
Okay.
at all.
You were looking
perplexed. No, I'm not perplexed. I just, I think that I want to just turn a little bit, because I think that's really well summarized, actually, and discuss maybe briefly the relationship to men in the novel, because I think you're right that the relationship to the mother is really central, and it's fascinating how what you're saying, I think, seems right in keeping with the novel, that your guilt is not about the church, it's in relation to the, or even God or Christ, it's in relation to the mother, really, and what she's imposed on you, and also trying to get, because there's this attachment to her. But the male figures are pretty fascinating. So there's a few teachers that were really had an emancipatory quality for you,
Yeah.
and I'd like you to talk about that. But also, the relationship to the father is really equally fascinating. I mean, it's the opposite of the teachers, and it's in a certain way the opposite of the mother, right? So maybe you can talk about that.
You and I had a brief discussion about this, and you alerted me to something that I wasn't aware of, and I agree with I agree empirically with your idea that many times when we write a book, there's a lot of things that we're revealing that are far more central to it than we realize, because we might be focused on one dimension of our experience. But you pointed out that one of the things that defines this character is his rebellion against authorities, which in some ways is a rebellion against the father. My father, in the case of my father, of course, he's an abusive alcoholic. At the same time, and I in rereading it, there are many passages in there where this kid is just his love for his father is like the time he finds the father behind the tree in the cemetery crying, and he wants to comfort him. And he go when he I think there is a dimension to this book which is a search for the father. I think actually he finds the father when he works with the construction workers,
Right,
and
right.
becomes that's the best thing my father ever gave me. At the age of 15, I was working with men in a construction company in downtown Chicago, and I had to earn my way among men. And there was one guy especially whose recognition, and isn't that part of what I sought and gained. And gained by showing that I would shoulder whatever he was going to shoulder, et cetera. And I think a lot of in his freshman year in college, as much as discovering Sartre, for example, it's the teacher who gave him that book of Sartre.
Yeah.
I was lucky. I had two teachers, the one for freshman composition, and I was a journalism major, so we just had these 10 journalism majors in each section. This guy was magnificent. He was a TA. He encouraged me to read all sorts of things. And then I got a guy in philosophy, one who I just sent a copy of the book to, by the way, where we were supposed to be taught only Thomism. He snuck Plato in. And then when he found out that I was interested, he gave me existentialism as a humanism. And we sat down and talked. And I said, it's weak. It's weak. And then he gave me a copy of Being in Nothingness. He was setting me up. But I mean, it was having figures like that where the men were men because of their minds, and one became got recognition from them and sought it. Later on, the one who told me I shouldn't study philosophy, Professor Smits, who later wrote a book on John Paul II, by the way. So that was my revenge.
No, but that was it was interesting to me how central that is. Like, you're so compelled by philosophy in the novel, right? And then the great act by someone is to say, look, you're not cut out for a philosophy program. But he did you the real solid of, I mean, this couldn't happen today, I don't think. Maybe it could. Like, he just got you into University of Chicago in a literary program, right? Like that is amazing.
Yeah, but those were two. The guy who got me into Chicago.
Oh, they're two different guys. Okay, sorry.
Well, to give the other example, the young woman Carol, or Cassie is the name I give her in the novel, who has spent most of her life in mental institutions. She was encouraged by this one priest to go to the Pontifical Institute in Toronto to study theology, something that she was totally unequipped for. She flunked out and fell apart. There were these strange things at Marquette where people were being fashioned and chosen for different things if they showed that kind of intellectual interest, and some of it was, I don't know what I'm saying now.
Well, it's interesting how you were able to, like, you just, I mean, the novel's in many ways about, I mean, in a certain way, it's about your own, like, passion to find something that would be fulfilling to you, right? And be adequate to what the problems that you had to like work out certain existential problems that you felt. But then on the other hand, it's a novel about contingencies, right? Like if you didn't happen to have these certain professors or this certain
Yeah.
person, then it never would have happened.
But the main person I had was the books I read.
Yeah.
These people were great helps. They led me to the books, but the thing I wanted to do in the second half of the book, which is the 4 years of college, it also has the Cuban Missile Crisis and the assassination of Kennedy. So there are some big worldly events that occurred during this time. But I wanted basically, and I found out only 20 years later at a reunion that everybody referred to me as Crazy Mac when I was in college, because all I wanted to do was study. I spent 4 years, and I wanted to offer this to people and say, this is what college could be. Quit screwing around. Quit making it 4 years of nonsense. These are 4 years of the freedom you'll never have again to take up the questions you will never have a chance to raise again, and to do it with a seriousness. And I spent most of my time, I never had a roommate. I always lived alone. And I spent, like with the Brothers Karamazov thing, I just didn't come out for a week. I didn't go to classes or anything. I didn't, that one gal came by with some food one day, and I didn't understand the full meaning of that. But I would do this. I would bury myself in the study of things, and it was always a study both of philosophy and literature, because even then I was bouncing back and forth. I want to add something here. My brothers, two of my brothers, one has read this book and another is now reading it. I didn't want them to even know that it existed, but I forgot that they're on a newsletter that I have, and they've been really very gracious.
That's surprising to me.
Yeah, it really surprised me, because I am brutally honest about both of my parents. I think that and I thought.
Well, the other thing is the brothers are so marginalized. I mean, if I were a brother reading it, I'd be like, wait a minute, I was actually a part of his life a little bit, wasn't I? Yeah.
Yeah. I think I have to be honest about that. No, I didn't have any brothers. I was always off in my own world. I was always engaged in this process of some kind of reflection. Part of what I'm looking back and I'm seeing these things, I'm saying, the questions you're asking are not the questions that most 6 or 8 or 10-year-olds ask, buddy. I was always kind of, I think part of it was the house I grew up in. I put a shell around myself. And the shell was, because my parents fought every night. It was vulgar. And I just kind of retreated into myself. And so I never really related to any of my brothers in any meaningful way. We have relationships, but they're basically, let's talk about the Cubs. Let's talk football.
Guy Tug. Were all 6 kids in one bedroom, or were some of the kids in your parents' bedroom?
This is you're gonna love this, Vanessa. You never knew where you were gonna sleep. There was one constant. Wherever my father wanted to sleep, he slept. And he always went to bed before it, because he came home and he had a few on the train, and he drank until he was ready to sleep. He would grab a bed wherever he wanted. Then began musical beds. We had a hide-a-bed in the living room that you took out. Frequently, my mother would sleep in one of those collapsible chairs. There was also a dog in the middle, but the dog slept with my father because my father gave the dog beer. But you never knew where you were going to sleep, and there were times where you'd end up in the same bed as the hide-a-bed, and your mother would be there. But it was all very, very strange.
I was in the same room with my parents till I was like 12.
Wow.
Yeah, because we only had one room that had air conditioning, like a little wall unit, and it's Florida. So they just had like a bed for me, like a single bed in their room all the time until I was like 12, and I finally got my own room. So that's weird.
Yeah, I have an episode in there
I'm
when I'm
imagining
12.
how many things I blocked out that I don't remember.
Did you just
Clearly
you
things were
just don't
happening in
remember?
there.
That's
Do you
Huh?
not
amazing.
remember anything? Do you not remember
Not
anything?
much. I mean,
I,
there was
I,
one, the room also would change because my dad's a carpenter and our house was old from 1913. So he was constantly like fixing things up, but he would never finish anything. He would just like go to the next room and tear it up. It was like constantly under construction, like, and just everything was a mess. Like, there was one period where like the living room had like one wall that was the living room, like the couch, and then the other wall had like the kitchen, and then there was a fireplace, and then there was a clawfoot tub next to the fireplace, and he just put this like folding Chinese screen in front of it and put the toilet there while he was like remodeling the bathroom and the kitchen. But it was like that for like
well,
years and
I
years and years.
understand that that's the problem that Joseph had with Jesus. That Jesus was a very bad carpenter who never finished it.
Yeah, it was just
He
constantly
still,
under construction. And so there was one time where we were in the all in this room that eventually became my own room. And then I had my own bed. But then there was another time when he was working on that room and we moved into the room that was their master bedroom, where I literally slept on a mattress on the floor on the foot at the foot of my parents' bed. And I
that's
remember sleeping
that's
there like the most and like seeing what TV
oh,
shows like they were watching. Like I remember they watched like Twin Peaks. I must have been like
oh,
older at that time and like Miami Vice and stuff. But
yeah,
like I
you
was
had good
like on
stuff.
the floor at the foot of their bed. Like what
I
the
had
fuck,
I
guys?
had
At least you
five.
got to
Yes.
see good shows at least. That's
Yeah.
pretty.
There's an episode in the book where I uh, stayed awake and heard my parents making love.
Yeah, I'm assuming
A
I must have
a
blocked a
rare
lot of that
occurrence,
out because I don't have any
and
memory of that,
yeah,
but I mean, you know, it
well,
had to be happening.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I heard a lot. Let's put it that way. I heard a lot.
Yeah. I have my mom has a very good like denial repression mechanism where like she just rewrites reality however she sees fit. And I think I've inherited it a little bit where like I can just like be like this doesn't exist and just I think that's what I've done.
Yeah.
Just like it was fine.
Did you talk about it in analysis or not?
Yeah, but I don't really remember that much of it. Like it didn't like get much deeper. And I brought it up to her and it took like at first when I brought it to her, like, Mom, why did I never have my own room? She's like, you had your own room. I'm like, no, I didn't. And then like after a while, I was like, don't you think that's like unhealthy? And she's like, I never really thought about it. And I was just like, okay.
Did
No,
you give her a copy of your novel?
no, I encouraged
I
them
mean,
not to
there's where
read
you'd
it.
find out. You got
They
a
might
pretty
have
randy
secretly
novel.
they might have secretly ordered it and be talking about it because they
Yeah.
are acting a little strange. But I told them that for their best interest, they should probably not read that book.
Hmm.
Because there was a period where my mom, like, I say kicked me out because I don't know how else to explain it. In her mind, she just asked me to sleep over at friends' houses for the summer, but like didn't make any arrangements for me to sleep over at anyone's house or anything. Was just like, you need to leave and like you can come back
You
when
need
school
to leave.
starts. But I just like left for 4 months or whatever because school also wasn't finished. It was like May. But anyway, it's like mostly what happened during that period. And I don't think I think it like might psychologically like do something crazy
Yeah.
to her if she like reads reality, you know?
My mother was she was a master of denial. She and you know, I'm sorry to say that were my parents around, they would be MAGA, and they
Yeah,
would be
I'm surprised
convinced
my
that
dad
Trump was
isn't.
being
I'm very
persecuted.
glad. I'm surprised that Trump is like too far for him. But like my dad's entire, actually both sides of my family, except for my parents. My parents are Democrats, but literally my mom's from Alabama and her whole family is like crazy, super crazy Christian MAGA people. And my dad's side of the family, they've always been Republican, but I would have hoped that Trump would be too far.
Yeah,
But now they're all crazy MAGA people. I literally don't talk to anybody in my family except for my parents. They've
it's
all lost the plot completely.
yeah, it's so alarming. Uh,
Yeah. And my dad said last he went to like Easter or something at my cousin Jenny's house. And like they took him to one of these mega church things and they were all
oh
like
my
doing this
goodness,
mega
yeah.
church thing. And like they've never been like that. I'm like, what is going on with these people? Wild.
Very wild, but terrifying
Terrifying.
because there's no way that these things can be corrected by experience. You know, and and it, you know, that's the cult-like status of it. I saw something of Trump that they put on TV this morning. He's given one of his rallies, and he starts talking about an electrocuted boat and a shark, and would you go down with the boat, or would you let the shark eat you? And
like psychotic.
There's no idea what the hell he's talking about. But he went on for a few minutes with this thing.
Yeah, he says he doesn't drink, but he must be on like pills or something. Like,
he gotta be on something, yeah.
Yeah, they gotta be on like prescription meds or something. Something's wrong.
It could be just dementia, don't you think? It could be dementia.
Oh, I think he's in advanced dementia, yeah. That's what they, but you know what they said of King Lear? He had ever but slenderly known himself.
That's right. They did say that about King Lear, right? That is true. Do you have any
another
final words, man?
I'm sorry.
Do you have any other words? Yeah, no, I don't have any more questions, but I just wondered if you had.
I'm in the process. I don't know if you do this. I'm in the process of grieving this book. There's a part, and I think the book is very transgressive. It says things about the parents that we're supposed to not say, and a number of things throughout. It is a confession. It's an attempt, but a confession that asks for no absolution. The only absolution is to change your life. But I'm finding that it's left me with a feeling of mourning the completion of it. I think that's part of what you have to do in order to write the next book. In order to take up the next one, you got to find some way. I'm hoping that with this one, I can be less violent than I've been. What I've done, and I really regret it, but you know, when you're 81 years old, you don't have time to regret things for long. But I have, it seems to me again and again that I've tried to sabotage my own work as a part of that. It's out there. I don't want to have anything more to do with it. And I'm hoping I don't do that with this book, because I'm having I feel a responsibility to this book, which is more important than my own screwed up psyche. That I owe it something, if that makes any sense. And I owe it to treat it with some kind of respect, in hopes that it will find, you know, I read a thing the other day about a woman who turned out some handbook. It was souped up Jungian psychology. She called it the Shadow Notebook. And she wrote this thing, and it got on TikTok. She now has over 1 million readers who have bought this book. I got 56 at this point. I check every day. And she's been given a contract with Scribner's for 3 more books. There are going to be more souped up Jungian. I didn't think Jung could be simplified. You know, and that, I think, part of what we have, the world we live in, there's far too many books. I wrote a novel, so did everybody else.
I wrote a novel. I'm actually reading another novel by a psychoanalyst now that's really good too. That's like memoiric. I don't know if you know Griffin Hansberry, but he's in New York, and he was like the first kind of openly trans psychoanalyst. And he wrote a book that's like a coming of age story about like realizing he was trans and stuff. And it's like, he's a little older than me. I think he's in his early 50s. So this is like in the 1980s, and he like sees the trans woman like in his little small town, and you know, she turns him on to like Patti Smith and Robert Mapplethorpe, and it's just like blowing in his mind, you know. And it's so good. It's called Some Strange Music Pulls Me In or Draws Me Near. For some reason,
that's fascinating.
Patty Smith line.
we had just this past weekend, and we have once a year, we have, and I live in a small town, Grand Haven, Michigan, which is largely MAGA, but we have every year a Pride Festival on one given Saturday, and it was started by the rector of the Episcopal Church. He's the one who aggravated for it and got it off the ground, and it's really interesting to see all the drag queens come into town, and it's
refreshing.
And it's so, I mean, part of Michael's not alone. This book chronicles a time in our sexual history when so many people had their sexuality profoundly wounded by religion, and had it to give you an example, most of the women that I knew in college lost their virginity in their senior year of college. After, and in many cases, with all the sexual dysfunctions that goes with all the stuff that was imposed on us. That's a very different world. And I wanted to try to chronicle that world from the inside of the psyche to show what that struggle was like. And it continues.
It's great. I can't wait to read it. I can't wait till it arrives.
I wish I could give it to you right now.
Put the episode out like when you've done the corrections, so people can get the correct version.
That's what I have to apologize to, and I'm going to send a letter to about 20 people that I've given copies to, apologizing and just asking you. They're not the kind of most of it. It's an aggravation that gets in the way at times. It's a misspelled word, or there's two words repeated, or it's stuff. It's an aggravation, and I apologize for it. But I don't think the reading experience is really going to be structured by it. I think my friend actually sent me that email to try to fuck with me. Excuse me. He's a writer.
Raining on your parade.
Yeah. Yeah, but I
don't think it's. I read the version. I don't think it's.
Yeah, you read. You've read. I read your book 3 times. You read mine twice or 3 times. I would love to have some time where we had a thing where Emancipation since Hegel and the Last Catholic were up on a table together, and we were engaging in that thing that you and I have tried to engage in from time to time, because my choice is not a choice that is opposed to philosophy by any means. And I think one of the things we've discovered is that much of what I experience as conflict, you experience as contradiction. And those are not incompatible ways of understanding something. They're different ways. And I find it's interesting to me, because I had this course in Hegel and Nietzsche when I was a senior, and that started my romance with both of those figures, though the one with Hegel remained. And yet I find, as you know, I wish I had a year free so that I could catch up with what people like you and Zizek and others have done with Hegel, because I think you've opened his philosophy in ways that were shut down. We didn't get thesis, antithesis, synthesis crap, but we got this notion that Hegel was about the triumphant progression of reason to some point where it was sure of itself and blah, blah, blah. And you've done such a magnificent job of showing that Hegel's saying the exact opposite of that. And if it's a progression of anything, it's a progression of errors, that show us that error is inevitable. And that reading of Hegel, which I think is the correct one, though one has to forgive Hegel's rebarbative style. But that no one, when I was first studying Hegel, this is in the late 60s, no one said any of that.
No one did.
No one said that. The closest, some of the stuff that Koheva said, some of the stuff that Lukács said, but not the way it has now been in so many figures. I mentioned you and Zizek, but there's the French women who have done such. It's a remarkable freeing of that thought from the misunderstandings that were imposed on it. I find the more I think, the more I think that perhaps the most important philosophic book I've ever read is Being in Nothingness. And I think Sartre is one of those who taps into a Hegel that other people weren't getting a hold of.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think that Sartre we need Sartre plus the unconscious, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I want to throw in a thing here, by the way, that I think of the novel as, and here's a ponderous statement, as a existential psychoanalytic drama.
I think that's right. That's what I think it is.
Synthesizing existentialism and psychoanalysis as a means of narrating a life. But there are one of the parts, as I reread it all this past week, one of the parts that I really love is the time where he sneaks back to college a week ahead of time, lies to his mother, goes up there and spends a week reading the interpretation of dreams and completely, getting inside that book. It's, I guess, one of the things that you both know this, and I wish more people did. Wallace Stevens has a poem where he says, "The reader became the book." That's why we read. And if we get the right books, that's something where we are engaged in a dialogue that forces us to bring everything that's conflicted in our own soul into that experience. I say that sometimes in a very abstract formulation, that reading is a co-created intersubjective transaction of the two, of the writer and the reader. When it's a rich, fulfilling experience, it can never be passive.
Yeah, like a work of art.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. Should we end with that? That seems kind of perfect.
It's a good ending point.
I should put in another kind of plug for the book, but I just want to say, I don't know. I suspect a year from now I will have sold 150 copies, and that strikes me as sad. But there's so little I can do about it. But what I really want with this book, I want to give it to people, and I don't know. I haven't found a way to do that. And so I'm reaching out right now.
You can do Amazon, send author copies out, and then it doesn't charge them. And it only charges you cost.
I didn't know. I wouldn't know who to send it to. Send it to. I'm not saying this very well. My wife once said to me, she said, you may end up having a very big posthumous reputation. And without blinking, I looked at her and said, I can't live with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, the joke was intended. I hope the book will find people.
It will. This will be one avenue, and you can do other podcasts too.
Yeah. Eventually, we get 5 of these. It's a big book. Eventually, I'll have this. I'll say, "Screw you, Proust."
Yeah, exactly. And every time you have one, come back.
Absolutely. Well, I'll come back before that. I think we're going to do a thing on your book, Vanessa.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a wild ride.
It's a randy book.
It's a randy book. Yeah. I'm glad that it's done though. It's like my experience, like you said, you're grieving yours. I'm just like, I feel so relieved because my experience is like, I've been holding on to that girl, she's like been living in here. And like, now it's like, she has a place, she can live there. And I don't have to like carry it around. It doesn't feel so heavy. It was like really such a traumatic time with like Hurricane Andrew, and my parents got divorced and my mom kicked me out. And it was just like insanity. And I've just been like, and then I just like went back to school and acted like everything was normal, you know?
Exactly.
And like we never talked about it. And like my dad was no longer around, and my mom was like totally like checked out, and we're just like, okay, just keep pretending everything's normal, you know? And so it's like just been like sitting here, and now it's like, okay, now she lives in this book, and like I don't have to like carry around this thing. And I mean, this is 30 years ago, so it's like a long time, but that's, I guess, how trauma is.
Have you had interesting reactions from readers yet?
Yeah, people seem to really like it. A lot of people say they read it in like 2 days. Like they just like can't sit down and they read the whole thing. Yeah, so that's cute. And then there's a lot of people, like I had a book launch party in Miami while I was there. And so like a lot of people from Miami bought it, and of course they can all relate because Miami was so crazy at that time. I mean, it always has been, I think, but I think the late 80s, early 90s was especially crazy with all the cocaine cartels and everything. So yeah, so everyone was like, thank you for like putting this experience into a book, because like basically most people I know just like have like repressed it, you know? They're just like, well, that was fucked up, and like, well, let me go on with my life and try to be like a normal person, you know?
Yeah.
And I think I had really largely done that also until my friend got killed. And then when she got shot, it just like brought everything like up, like just everything came out, and I was like, I had to do something with this. So just like
you sound like this writing process was cathartic for you.
Yeah, it was very cathartic. It just like had to come out. So now it's out and I feel much better. So that's good. But now I have to talk about it. And I'm like, yeah, that happened. It was weird, but I also think of it as, because when you grow up and you go through things like this, you know, people like the church or whatever authority makes you feel like you are bad, like, oh, bad kids, like running around on the streets or whatever. But it has also helped to like read a lot of books about that time period and like what was going on politically, and like the whole like, you know, like you talked about the Cuban Missile Crisis and the aftermath of that, and growing up in Miami and all the drug cartels and like all the corruption. So it was just like basically like what happens to a child, a 15-year-old who's like growing up in the middle of this. And then my parents, of course, were affected. My dad was drafted because he was like the age of Vietnam time. And my mom's dad was in the military and super alcoholic, abusive, and they married her off to his friend when she was 16. So it was just like, how do all these political things like affect everyday people's lives? And it like makes you have to deal with some crazy fucked up shit.
Sure.
It doesn't make you bad people. It just makes you people trying to figure it out.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so that's helped, because I think when I was younger, I felt like I was bad, you know.
Oh.
But
I'm glad you overcame. Yeah.
Just had to go live through that crazy shit.
I noticed Todd has up on his wall now, Proust and Marx are next to each other up there in ways that you can't miss it. Well, being in time is on one end, and I don't know what that thing is on the other end.
It's Kafka's collected works.
Oh, wonderful.
Nice.
That's a good shelf you got there.
Yeah. Good shelf.
Well, thank you guys.
Thank you so much.
Vanessa. Great talking to you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I'll talk to you both. See you both.
Yeah. See you next time.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.